If you're anything like me, then you have probably got a very loud voice in your head that is constantly screaming about the next big thing you need to be worried about. Do your taxes, get that assignment done for class. Don't forget you have to work at your job later. Respond to the 30 reels that bro sent you. Research the Epstein files, graduate college, your 5-day life, and retire from your job. In the past, these are all thoughts I've had that never seem to shut off. But what if you could quiet those invasive thought loops while actually gaining a deeper appreciation for life and a clearer understanding of the world? It might sound dramatic or maybe even unrealistic, but stick with me here, because I'm going to be making a very simple suggestion, and that is to pick up one of Ernest Hemingway's novels and start reading it today. Now, I know exactly what you're thinking, but don't go away just yet, because this isn't going to be your generic "reading is good for your brain" YouTube video. No, I'm suggesting a very particular type of reading, the type of reading that is perfect for guys who have fried attention spans and actually struggle in their daily lives with a litany of problems. What if I told you there is a place you could go to filled with
wonder,
magic, Quidditch, spells, and...
Wait, those actually aren't the books I'm thinking of. Let me try that again. What if you could go to a world that's actually real? Not fantasy, not escapism in the childish sense. A world that feels almost identical to ours, but it's just set decades in the past. This is a world where men spoke less, but they meant more, where every decision actually carried weight. A world where love felt earned, where war felt terrifying, where loneliness felt honest, where purpose wasn't something you tweeted or made a LinkedIn post about, but it was something you had to suffer to find. And the craziest part yet, you can visit this world whenever you want. It costs like $15, probably less, and a quiet room to sit in. This world I'm speaking of, it exists inside the pages of Ernest Hemingway's writing. This video isn't a lecture. It's designed to be far more practical for your daily life. Everything feels loud yet meaningless at the same time. But how can reading one author, just one, genuinely slow your mind down? How could it sharpen how you see the world? How could it give you a kind of peace that no algorithm, purchase, or productivity hack has ever been able to replicate? Alright, before we get into why you should read his books, we need to understand who Hemingway actually was as a man, because his life is inseparable from what he wrote. This section of the video deserves a video in and of itself, but I will do my best to explain who Hemingway was as a person in as brief a period of time as possible. For those of you who've never heard of him, Ernest Hemingway was an American writer from the early 1900s, noted for winning multiple writing awards, one of them being a Nobel Prize in Literature in 1954. However, calling him just a writer misses the entire point. His work feels real because his life was real. Messy, intense, adventurous, and at times very dark. He grew up in a strict household. His father was a doctor, serious and disciplined, but also an avid outdoorsman. His mother was artistic, religious, and had very strong expectations for how he should behave and who he should become. Their whole life wasn't abusive in the way people throw that word around today, but it was rigid, controlled, and heavy with pressure. As a little boy, Hemingway's mother, Grace, was noted for how she would dress young Ernest up as a little girl, putting him in dresses and having him sport longer hair. She did this because she wanted Ernest and his younger sister, Marceline, to appear as twins. Later as an adult, Hemingway would claim to hate his mother. This is part of the tension that followed him into adulthood. His father eventually died by suicide, a moment that haunted Hemingway for the rest of his life. It planted a kind of darkness in him, a fear of mental decline, and personal collapse that shows up again and again in his writing. Years later, tragically, Hemingway himself would follow the same path. But long before that, he lived fast. He became a journalist as a young man, which shaped his writing style. Blunt, direct, stripped down to only what matters. Then World War I happened. He volunteered as an ambulance driver and was severely wounded while bringing chocolate and cigarettes to Italian soldiers at the front lines. Hemingway later said of the incident, "When you go to war as a boy, you have a great illusion of immortality. Other people get killed, not you. Then when you are badly wounded, the first time you lose that illusion, and you know it can happen to you." After that, nothing in his worldview was naive anymore. The soldiers in Generation who fought in the Great War later became known as the Lost Generation, a title that shows severe disillusionment by the war, aimlessness, and a rejection of traditional pre-war social values. Hemingway is known as one of the key authors who came about in the Lost Generation. Among other classical authors you might know, like F. Scott Fitzgerald and Gertrude Stein. After coming home from the war, Hemingway spent years moving across Europe. He was surrounded by artists, writers, and people trying to rebuild meaning after chaos. He drank heavily, fell in love multiple times, married more than once, traveled constantly, chased adventure, danger, purpose, anything that made him feel alive. He hunted, he fished, he boxed, he reported on wars, he put himself in risky situations again and again. Part of it was curiosity, part of it was restlessness, and part of it was clearly him trying to outrun something internal. That internal struggle is the thread running through almost everything he wrote. His characters are often men who are strong on the outside, but wrestling silently on the inside. Men trying to maintain dignity while dealing with loss, fear, jealousy, aging, failure, and loneliness. Men who don't say what they feel, but you can feel it anyway. Because he felt it. His drinking wasn't just social, it was coping. His relationships weren't always stable. They were intense, passionate, and complicated. His worldview wasn't optimistic, it was realistic. Sometimes brutally so. And that's exactly why his stories hit as hard as they do. They're not written from imagination alone. They're written from experience, and sometimes often from pain. When you read him, you're not just reading fiction. You're watching a man to understand courage, purpose, masculinity, suffering, and what it means to live a meaningful life in a world that often feels chaotic and unfair. And once you understand the life behind his pages, the family pressure, the trauma, the drinking, the constant searching, his writing stops feeling like
school literature
and starts feeling like a conversation with someone who has actually been through it. Does this sound like an interesting person who might be qualified to write a decent book? Good, because now I want to go into why Hemingway's books will probably be the most substantive, yet easy to read of all of the classical authors. Listen, I know a lot of the bros will probably get icked out when words like
classic literature
start getting tossed around. To most of y'all, I'm sure the first thoughts going through your minds are boring, pretentious, hard to understand, and written for English majors. Hemingway is actually the complete opposite of this stereotype. Hemingway's style of writing is best summed up in his own words, when he once said, "My aim is to put down on paper what I see and what I feel in the best and simplest way." When asked about how he gets his writing done, he said at one point, "It is all very well for you to write simply, and the simpler the better. But do not start to think so damn simply. Know how complicated it is and then state it simply." As we touched on earlier, coming from a journalistic background, Hemingway understood that trying to sound smart for the sake of
Sounding smart.
will get you fired from your job.
Bruh.
A good journalist must state the facts he knows as accurately and concisely as possible. To put it bluntly, do not confuse Hemingway with Shakespearean English. He writes in short sentences and clear ideas. No rambling and no trying to sound smart. He writes like a man talking to you in a conversation, direct and honest. You certainly don't need a literature degree or to be able to analyze symbolism to get the gist of what is being said. You just read and it makes sense. And if you're someone who hasn't read a book since high school, well, that's perfect. Because this is literally the best entry point you could ask for. It builds your reading stamina without feeling like homework. In fact, when you read through a Hemingway novel, you will probably be so sucked into the characters and the storyline, you will probably struggle to put one of his novels down. And this is what leads me to the next point. Real quick, if you've been enjoying this video so far, I would kindly ask you to hit that subscribe button, as that would help the channel out greatly. If you could just do this one favor for me, it would make my day. We're trying to reach 100 subscribers
before the release of GTA 6.
Here's where things really start to click once you actually read Hemingway's work. Hemingway's characters are not dealing with fantasy problems. They're not saving the world. They're not the chosen ones. They're not perfect. They're dealing with the same stuff you are, the same stuff men have always dealt with. Lack of purpose, trying to figure out what your life is even supposed to be about. Love that's complicated, uncertain, or just slipping away. Jealousy you don't want to admit. The pressure to be strong when you don't feel strong. War, literal war, and the internal kind as well. Loneliness, even when you're surrounded by people. This is why his writing still holds up today. The most timeless works in history focus on the most timeless problems. And these problems haven't changed just because we have smartphones and Wi-Fi connections now. Men do still struggle to find meaning. They still want to be respected, to be loved. They still feel like they're falling short sometimes. Still carry things they don't talk about in front of others. Hemingway understood that, and instead of preaching about it or over-explaining it, he just showed it. You'll read about a guy sitting at a bar, not saying much, but you can feel everything going on inside of him. You'll read about relationships where nothing dramatic is happening on the surface, but you can sense the tension, the distance, the things left unsaid. You'll read about men trying to hold themselves together after loss, after war, and after failure. And it hits because it feels familiar. Not in a depressing way, but in an honest way. It reminds you that your struggles aren't new. You're not uniquely broken. You're not the only one trying to figure things out. Men 100 years ago were asking the same questions. What am I supposed to do with my life? What does it mean to be strong? How do I deal with pain without letting it destroy me? How do I love someone without losing myself? That's the power of literature when it's done right. It collapses time. You realize the guy sitting alone in a cafe in 1925 isn't that different from you sitting in a car after work, staring at your phone, wondering what's next. And there's something weirdly grounding about that. It doesn't solve your problems overnight, but it gives them context. It makes them feel human instead of isolating. And when you start seeing your own struggles reflected in someone else's story, especially one written decades ago, you start to feel less alone and a little more steady in your own life. And here's the part nobody really tells you about when it comes to reading Hemingway. Something subtle starts changing in how you see people, and even how you understand yourself. Because when you spend time around stories like this, you don't just relate to the struggles, you start getting better at recognizing them, in others, in real conversations, in your own reactions. You start noticing tone more, silence more, the body language more, the things people don't say but they clearly feel. Hemingway's writing trains you to pick up on that because his characters rarely spell things out. The emotion is under the surface, you have to sense it. And once you start doing that while reading, it carries over into real life. You become a better listener. You react less impulsively. You understand tension instead of just feeling it. That's emotional intelligence, and most guys never intentionally build it. At the same time, something else happens. Your perspective widens. You're no longer stuck inside of your own head 24/7, cycling through the same worries and distractions. But you're stepping into others' lives, others' struggles, and others' mindsets. That makes you more thoughtful, more grounded, yet less reactive. And ironically, that's what makes you more interesting as a person. Not because you're trying to be, not because you're performing, but because you've actually spent time thinking, observing, and understanding things most people just scroll past. Your conversations get better, your presence gets calmer, your thoughts sharper. You become someone people can actually talk to, not just someone waiting for their turn to speak. All from picking up a book. And you start noticing that shift in how you listen, how you think, how you carry yourself. You realize the biggest change isn't just social or intellectual, it's internal. Because reading Hemingway doesn't just sharpen your mind, it quiets it. This is probably the hardest thing to explain, but the easiest thing to feel once it happens. There's a certain steadiness to Hemingway's work. Nothing feels rushed. Nothing feels artificial. He spends time describing ordinary moments. A drink at a bar, the sound of water, the feeling of being outside, the quiet tension between two people sitting across from each other. And when you read it, your brain starts operating at the same pace. Slower, more present, and less frantic. That constant noise in your head, the planning, the worrying, the replaying conversations,
The doomscrolling mindset.
it softens. Not because the book is telling you to relax, but because the world he creates forces you to sit still long enough to notice things again. A conversation matters, a walk matters, a meal matters, time with someone you care about matters. He had a deep appreciation for the simple things in life, and that appreciation bleeds through every page. You can feel it, and as a reader, it starts rubbing off on you whether you intend it to or not. You start noticing your own life differently. The morning gets quieter, music sounds better, you're less desperate for stimulation. You don't need 5 screens going at once to feel occupied. You're just there. And in a world that's constantly trying to pull your attention in 1,000 different directions, that kind of grounded presence feels almost rare. It's not flashy or dramatic, but it's peaceful in a way that feels earned. Not the fake peace you get from distraction. Real peace. The kind that comes from slowing down and actually experiencing your life while it's happening. That's the lingering effect his writing has on me as a reader. And I think it's something a lot of people, especially guys who feel mentally fried and overstimulated, are craving more than they even realize. So where should I start with Hemingway's works if I'm gonna pick it up and read it like you're suggesting, you might be asking? Personally, the first book of his I would begin with is The Old Man and the Sea. And I honestly think it's the best entry point for most people that I'm describing. It's short, simple, and powerful. You can finish it in a couple sittings, but it sticks with you way longer than that. The story isn't complicated, and that's exactly the point. It's about struggle, persistence, pride, defeat, and dignity. Themes that show up again and again in Ernest Hemingway's work. You don't need any literary backgrounds to understand it, you just read and it hits. If you finish that and want more, here's where I'd go next depending on what kind of reader you are. If you want something reflective and emotional, start with A Farewell to Arms. It dives into love, war, and what happens when life doesn't go the way you planned. If you want something more adventurous and atmospheric, pick up For Whom the Bell Tolls. It's heavier, but it pulls you into questions about duty, sacrifice, and purpose. If you want something raw and character-driven, read The Sun Also Rises. It's about drifting, searching for meaning, and trying to find your footing after life knocks you around. This one is one of my personal favorites. But don't overthink it. You don't need the perfect starting point. Just pick one, read a few pages, and just see how it feels. I'd recommend checking it out at the library before committing to purchasing it. The goal isn't to become a literary expert. Remember that. The goal is to reconnect with reading in a way that actually feels meaningful. Not forced, not academic or performative, especially not performative in today's day and age. The goal is just you, a quiet moment, and a story that might stick with you longer than anything you've scrolled past this week. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking it, and I'll see you in the next one.